It was the fulfillment of a dream to leave Britain and begin a new life on the beautiful Kenyan coast.
As soon as I stepped off the plane, I knew, oh my God, this is a place I want to be.
Nikki Roberts dreamt of running her own nightclub in paradise. But her dream became a nightmare when she came face to face with a side of Africa tourists never see.
It's in our heritage. It's something you grow up in Africa knowing that, hey, there is black magic and it's dangerous.
And when bribery and corruption left her penniless, she faced the agony and humiliation of a brutal Kenyan prison.
I hadn't done anything. I was completely innocent. The first time I ever went to Kenya was with Robin, who was my fiancé at the time. Robin just saw it as a holiday, a nice place to go. He didn't actually sort of get sucked into the vibe, the feeling of it. Africa has a magic about it. If you're in its grip, you can't help but go back. It's just like a burning need. You have to be there, and it just drags you back. And I went again and again and again. I always said that one day that maybe I'd retire there, or I'd definitely be there one day. I knew that.
But then, back in England, Nikki's life was turned upside down when her fiancé, Robin, was killed in a motorbike accident.
I was in complete shock for a while. He was 27 when he died. I mean, you know, 27-year-old dying just like that, it suddenly wakes you up. You suddenly realise, my God, this is your life. It could be over tomorrow. You know, anything could happen to you. You could be dead. So if you don't live now, you're never going to live.
With nothing left to keep Nikki in her hometown of Norwich, it was time to get away and start a new life. In Kenya, the money she received from Robin's life insurance policy would go 10 times further. Nikki would have the lifestyle she'd always dreamed of. Nikki returned to her favourite resort, Watamu, on the beautiful Kenyan coast. But this wasn't just for a holiday. She'd brought with her a state-of-the-art sound system.
It'd always been my dream to own a business out in Africa, and specifically a nightclub in Watamu, because I could see a niche in the market there. I knew that a nightclub there would just boom, so I wanted to go over there and just create the ultimate nightclub and really blow everyone away. I had a lot of background in the hospitality business, so I knew the business inside out. So I had the innate belief that I could do this, and I didn't have any fear about it.
But this was Kenya, a country with plenty of red tape. Obtaining a business permit wasn't easy. If Nikki wanted to earn a living from the lucrative tourist industry, she would need help.
On all my previous visits to Watamu, in fact, from the very first visit, I met a lady called Dorothy. She was such a laugh. We'd just sit on the beach all day, just gossiping and laughing. She used to also run a massage business on the beach, so often, because I had bad back from working on a computer so long in England, I decided, you know, that'd be great, and she worked on my back for me and got that sorted out. At the same time, I started mentioning about the business permit, and she told me that she knew somebody in Mombasa who might be able to help me, a lawyer, who might be able to help me obtain this Class H permit. I felt like, yeah, things are really moving now, you know, things are going my way, I can really make this happen, and I've got Dorothy by my side, I know, you know, I'm getting help. I handed over £1,300 in order to get the permit. I didn't feel alone, I felt like this can really work. One night I was with some friends in a club called Inferno. At that time, I wasn't looking for love at all. Oh, there's no way I was looking for love, especially after the shock of Robin's death.
It started funny. I was in a club and everybody was talking about this gorgeous, amazing-looking woman. She's from England and she's outstanding and nobody can get to her. All of a sudden, an angel appeared. That is her. That is the woman. That is the woman who's gonna bear me my children. There was nothing to say, just to give her the look, and she was fly.
All of a sudden, I see this guy and he's dancing on the dance floor and he's kind of taking the mickey out of the tourists, the way they dance, and really, really sort of OTT. But when they look around, he's sort of standing dead still. So I was laughing so badly.
All of a sudden, I give the look and tick, she's got my attention.
He was making jokes and being a bit of a clown and everything. And he came over and we started chatting. And when we actually spoke to each other, it was like, I just found out he was my soulmate. It was amazing. Once we sort of fell for each other, we were just together. We were inseparable. We were together morning, noon and night. We would go for long moonlight walks on the beach. It was like I fell in love at that point, just straight away. It was wham.
In Africa, we say troubles or love does not know how to knock the door. It just hits you right in your face.
At that stage, life seemed to be going amazingly well. I couldn't hardly believe it. I was in the place of my dreams. I had, the possibility of the most amazing business. I had the most incredible bloke alive. He was just everything to me. He was my soulmate. I couldn't have asked for more.
After Moffat moved in, Nikki quickly found some premises where she could set up her nightclub. She took with her the all-important business permit which Dorothy had recently obtained for her. But when she presented it to the building's owner, she didn't get the reaction she was hoping for. The permit was fake.
I felt incredibly hurt, because she was like my best friend, She was the only person I felt I could trust other than Moffat, and I felt destroyed. It really tore me up. I went to the police and they took a report, but not much was done about it. I was in a foreign country, and money taken, and I was just left high and dry.
Nikki Roberts had arrived in Kenya with a dream of starting a nightclub. Everything was going according to plan, but then her best friend sold her a fake business permit and made off with £1,300.
After this incident, it really hit home to me that there was a lot more to Kenya than I'd actually really realised. Moffat used to keep warning me. He used to say to me actually all the time, be careful, because it isn't what you think it is. Not all the smiling faces are hiding good hearts. That's one of his things he used to say. Smiling faces can be hiding black hearts too. I thought to myself, maybe, not everybody's going to be like this, surely. So I tried to sort of be open-minded and look forward to getting things sorted out. That was when I was introduced to a guy called Paul, who was an elderly man. They called him an old mazet. That means like an old fella, an old chap. He knew a lot about the system, about paperwork, about documents, about how to get things. He had connections in Nairobi. And a lot of people said, yeah, he'll help you, go see him. And he assured me that he would get me this work permit. And I was horrendously nervous about, giving him money, but after what happened with Dorothy. But he reassured me so much that I decided to give it a shot.
Nikki gave Paul more than £2,000 plus her passport, which he said would be needed to verify her identity.
But he said to me he would definitely need more money than that because you have to bribe, and there's so many bribes you have to do. Things just don't come easy like this in Kenya. Amazingly, 2 weeks he was back with the permit there in his hand, and I thought, God, this guy can be trusted. This is a guy I can use now. I mean, he's like, he can be a partner with us really to get this business up and running.
But as soon as Nikki's permit materialised, something else turned up.
One day, Nikki came home and she asked me, Moff, did you put something on the gate? And she asked me basically, Moffat, what is this thing? Who can, put blood and skin and all the rubbish in for a joke? Is this a prank like in England? I told her, no, my dear. No, this is no prank. This is a serious thing, and it's gonna affect us, and it's gonna beat us big time.
I reached down to pick it up, and Moffat immediately sort of said, no, don't do that. My God, don't touch it. And I go, why? He said, it's juju. I said, what's juju? And he explained it was like voodoo. Somebody had thrown it there to basically give us a curse. Throughout the next few days, more and more of these things arrived, but different kinds of ones. We didn't know who was doing it. We had no idea it was happening in the night, so we'd find it in the morning. And my most anxious thought was, what are they after? Who's doing it and why, really? Not long after these things were found on the doorstep, Paul drove round and was quite excited, and he sat down and said, there's something you ought to listen to, Nikki. He said that these things are dangerous. They're going to bring you bad luck. They're going to stop your business moving forward. Things aren't going to go your way. If you want to be protected, there's something you have to do.
It's in our heritage. It's something you grow up in Africa knowing that, hey, there is black magic and it's dangerous.
Paul arranged for Nikki and Moffat to take part in a voodoo ceremony to counteract the curses.
It was really dark at night. We went through all these trees and we got to this place where there was a clearing. And there was this man, the witch doctor. He was dressed with his headdress on. He was stark naked apart from a loincloth. He had like scars all over his chest, like where he'd been sliced. And Moffat explained to me this was part of a lot of the ceremonies where you protect yourself, you have to be sliced. And I said, no way.
She went all ballistic and she said, nobody's gonna touch my skin with no blade, no one.
Last thing I noticed was this open grave. I thought, my God, what's that for? I was like really starting to panic at this stage.
Paul explained Nikki must lie down in the grave if she wanted the curse removed by the voodoo ceremony.
I was like, oh, I don't know if I can really go through with this. The whole thing was like something out of a horror movie.
She just went into the grave because she had to. Paul had told her that it's a must. We can't do without that.
You could imagine what it'd be like to be buried alive, actually, at that point. The witch doctor guy took one of the chickens and started plucking it while it was still alive and then throwing the feathers down over me. Then they got one of the chickens and actually slit its throat over the top of the grave where I was laying. There was this hot blood coming down on me, and it was landing on me, and at that point, I really freaked out.
She was very shaken, very shocked. There's some things you can teach somebody, but there's some things they have to go through them for them to understand. So she went through that, and I'm ever so sorry for her.
With the curse removed, Nikki could safely get on with her plans, and Paul was with her every step of the way.
After the juju ceremony, Paul became a much more important fixture in our life. He was our unofficial driver who would drive us where we needed to go. He was also assisting us with the search for land, the appropriate land to build our nightclub on. He was great.
With Paul sorting out the land deal, Nikki started getting things ready for her dream nightclub. But it was proving to be more expensive than she'd expected.
Meanwhile, we'd started to run out of money. So Paul had suggested that we rent out the sound system.
The state-of-the-art sound system was an essential part of Nikki's plan. There was nothing like it in Watamu. Paul arranged a demonstration for all the local bar and club owners.
A number of people come by, Some of the people from the Jambo nightclub down the road came by and had a look.
By the end of the day, Paul had clinched the deal, renting Nicky's sound system to the local Jambo nightclub.
Everything was going amazingly well, so smoothly. We really felt positive, me and Moff. We believed, things were going to really pan out well for us. The dream was coming alive now at last. And then there was a phone call and the maid came running with a phone. The police are on the phone, I was like, oh my God, what is this? What is it? So I was told on the phone that the owner of Jambo Club was at the police station and he was saying that I'd sold my sound system to him and not delivered the goods. And the policeman on the phone said, you have to come down here now, we have evidence against you. When we got there, Paul was there. And I was like, why is he here? And I was quite confused. And the police were saying, what have you done with the money? And they said, we have documents. And they came over with this and tried to thrust it in my hands.
I said, take it!
And I said, no, you're not going to get me to touch that. My prints are nowhere on that, I can tell you now. They said, we have your signature. I was absolutely amazed at how my signature looked. It did look like my signature. The only person who knew my signature and who had a copy of it was Paul. It also had my passport number on there. And I couldn't believe it. As I read further, I saw that Paul was actually written as the person who'd done the deal. And I said, what's going on, Paul? What is going on? He didn't say anything. I started getting very angry at this point, started screaming, what have you been playing at? This was obviously some kind of scam. How could he be involved in this? He was our friend. So I started to think, my God, this man, what about all the money I've given him? Scrawling off a IOU whenever I gave him money, sometimes 200 here, 100 there. I just couldn't understand. I mean, this was our friend.
With Paul's betrayal sinking in, Nicky was sent home by the police chief to get the sound system. But she had other ideas. She called her neighbour, who'd lived in Kenya for years, and asked for help.
She said she would be willing to hide the system. And she said she also had a contact in the police station who she'd be able to find out what was really going on behind the scenes. She made a phone call and said, Nicky, you need to get out of Watamu now. I said, why? She said, they're coming to arrest you. And if you go in, you'll stay in. She said, I've got an idea. I know the Deputy Commissioner of Police in Nairobi. I can give him a call and let him know you're coming, and he'll be able to sort it out for you.
Take my car, here. Go!
Nairobi was 600 kilometers away. It would take them 12 hours to get there.
We had to drive in the middle of the night to Nairobi, and it was one hell of a journey.
I sat there, gripping the wheel, absolutely terrified. I was half expecting a police car to come screaming up behind me any minute. Paul had completely dashed all our hopes on every front. It looked like every single thing that we had done was fake. All our dreams were basically in the dirt. We had nothing. All we had now was our freedom, so we were running for our lives.
Nicky and Moffat arrived in the Kenyan capital. They began putting the pieces together.
Paul, Jambo Club owner, and the head of the police station were all of the same tribe. That might not mean much in England, but in Kenya it's a big deal because somebody of your tribe is like your brother and you'll do anything to help them. And more than likely the whole idea had been to frighten me so much I would have handed the sound system over. And literally they would have got the system for peanuts. We realised that was the lowest point we'd reached so far. Everything was in tatters. We didn't know what to do. We had no land, no money, no job. Things were looking really black. When we entered the office, the commissioner sat there behind his desk, and I would have thought he'd been quite a scary figure, but he wasn't. He was He was very friendly, he had a big beaming smile on his face, and he welcomed us, he shook our hands and told us to sit down. And then he said, "What can I do for you, my dear?" So we told him the story. We said, you know, exactly what had happened, and he then proceeded to ask us for 7,000 shillings, which in English money at the time was about £70. We gave him the money. I said, "So what's going to happen? Are we going to be okay? You know, is it going to be sorted?" And he said, don't you worry, be at home in Kenya, feel at home." And I said, "Right, well, I still don't know what's going to happen. Can I go back and not be arrested? Is it safe to go back?" And he said, no, it's fine, I'll sort it, don't worry." So I thought, well, nothing more I can do about it, and I just had to leave because he wasn't going to say any more. So I left the office and we went to a hotel to sleep.
When Nikki and Moffat returned to Watamu, they found the commissioner had been true to his word. He'd sacked the local chief of police. And there was some other good news.
We discovered that Paul now had a warrant for arrest against him. So he'd gone on the run. At the same time, we started having really strange things happening in our house. It had a really dark sort of quality. We started feeling uneasy. We had lights flickering on and off. We would start to hear sounds outside which we couldn't identify. It might sound crazy, but this really happened. The maid ran. We didn't see her again for days. And Moffat said, "There's juju going on again." We've actually heard through somebody in the village that Paul had actually been behind it, basically getting revenge because there was now a warrant out for his arrest. So we knew that he was deeply embroiled in this kind of stuff, and we actually feared. So we decided we had to get away. We then moved to Malindi, which is about 30 kilometres away. And I've discovered I was pregnant at that point.
Nikki Roberts' dream wasn't turning out the way she had planned. She'd been hounded out of her house by black magic and conned by the people she'd trusted. Now, with her money almost gone, she was expecting a child.
The worst part was not really knowing what was going to happen, because I had no mother there, no sister, no friends. Nobody could give me any advice on how it was all going to happen and what pregnancy was all about. And there was no such thing as scans or anything like that going on. There was no hospital, not proper hospital, for about 130 kilometres. The nearest one was Mombasa. So I was literally in a town which didn't really have a proper hospital at all. All of a sudden, my waters broke and I was in the most unbelievable pain. There was no pain relief of any kind. I just had to get on with it.
After 24 hours, Nikki and Moffat realised they needed medical help. A local private clinic was the closest port of call.
Nothing was happening. I wasn't dilated. So we phoned the clinic and they said to me, if this carries on much longer, you're going to have to go to hospital and have a cesarean because you can't go more than 24 hours because the baby could suffer as a result. And they said they needed £500 up front. I didn't have £500, I was broke. So I was faced with the only alternative, and that was to go to the local hospital where the local people went, and off we went.
And I was comforting her all the time, and I know she was going through hell. And I told her, just be brave, you know. Hold on, we're gonna give birth and we're gonna get a beautiful kid, and she or he's gonna be adorable. But then it was not. They left it.
When we arrived at this hospital, I was expecting to see a hospital. What I basically saw was a collection of buildings, literally made out of breeze block. And throughout all these buildings were throngs and throngs of local Africans, some really sick, wailing on the floor. It was just chaos, and I just looked at this and thought, my God, I can't be having an operation in a place like this. I was taken to a room where they put a catheter in. The doctor came along, who was a very well-respected surgeon from the area, and I felt quite safe putting myself in his hands because he was known to help a lot of the white community. So I was put on this metal trolley. It was almost like something you'd wheel food on. And I was wheeled on this metal trolley, which was icy cold, through the corridor and straight into an operating theatre. I was then laid out on the operating table where people were actually arranging the knives and sorting the knives and scalpels and everything out right in front of me. This was completely scary. I was panicking. I didn't know what to do, and the next thing I know, I'm being put under.
As Nikki slipped into unconsciousness, what she didn't know was that the surgeon she trusted had gone home, too exhausted to perform another operation. Nikki was now in the hands of inexperienced trainee doctors.
I was in catch-22 situation. If I don't let her go in that theater and get operated on, obviously we'll lose our daughter. And if I let her go in there, I don't know what they're gonna do to her.
The next thing I remembered was being dragged up as if from somewhere really deep to the feeling of the most unbelievable pain I have ever felt in my entire life. It was like somebody was ripping my guts out from inside me. It's a burning pain so bad. I actually believed I was dead and in hell. As my mind came more and more conscious, I suddenly realised I was actually on the operating table. I was awake, they were operating on me, and I was paralysed. And I couldn't tell them. I tried to move my arms, I couldn't move them because the drug they give you to paralyse you was just so strong, you can't move a thing. And I laid there, trapped in this body, I couldn't move a thing, and I was just feeling everything.
I prayed and prayed, and about 30 minutes later, I heard a little voice. Oh.
At that point, I started expelling what looked like the placenta. So they hadn't even removed it during the operation, it was just left there. Another thing I could have died from.
It is lucky they delivered my kid alive. But from there on, it was a disaster to the end. They ripped my wife to bits, and I don't think I'll ever forgive those people.
Nikki gave birth to a healthy baby girl, Saffron, but her own recovery took some time.
It took me a long while before it healed. It took about 3 months before I was actually able to move normally. I couldn't do anything that was like dancing or running or anything that involved serious activity. I could move around, walk, but that was about the limit of what I could do. The reason I decided not to go back to UK at that point was the fact that facing defeat, giving in, I didn't want to go back and people go, you see, we told you so. I didn't want to face that. I was too proud, maybe wrongly, but I thought, right, I'm going to battle this, I'm going to win this, I'm going to make this happen. I've still got my dream, it can still happen. I'm going to do it. After some months had passed, I actually heard the very nightclub me and Moffat had met in, Inferno nightclub, had been empty for a year and was actually up for renting. So I thought, wow, this is my opportunity again, you know? Maybe I can get in there and you know, my dream can still happen. I went and saw the landlady and had a long discussion with her. She seemed very keen on the idea, and I was very surprised when she didn't actually require much in the way of money to get the place. She made an agreement with me that I could offset the cost of me doing the place against the rent. I basically got the roof repaired, painted it, did basically most of the superficial stuff, and we were open in time for Christmas. And the place became a massive hit. Everything was brilliant. You know, this was what I lived for. This is what I wanted. My little girl was being cared for by her own personal maid. Not ideal, but I had to make a living. Everything looked to be going fantastically, but then we started having problems.
So the abracadabra start again. The juju hit again.
It was just madness. The Askari, the watchman, at night started to refuse to work. He said there's weird things going on in the garden. He said there's creatures roaming this garden that aren't of this earth. Previously, we'd been packed full of people. Now, they were coming up to the door. They would actually put one foot over the threshold, would turn and walk away, and we couldn't make out what was going on.
The black magic hit has hurt with hatred, with such hatred and jealousy and envy. How can this British girl and this kissy boy, they come to our land, they earn what we could earn in a year in one night? That is hard to take for a Kenyan.
We keep running out of supplies all the time, so again, the customers were getting annoyed because they couldn't get this drink or that drink. Many a time I would call the beer company and sort of say, you know, what's going on with my beer? And I would not really get a reply. They would promise they would deliver it and it would never come. There was one particular time I was literally screaming down the phone, where's my beer? Where's my beer? Because my customers didn't have anything to drink. The next minute, I'm being dragged out of my house by police officers with guns at their sides. I was completely in shock. Now what have I done to deserve this, you know?
She was arrested, manhandled, being shoved by a gun in the back like as if she's a criminal. She's asking them, what's wrong, what's going on? You know what they tell her? Uh-oh, we are not allowed to talk to you. Only the judge can talk to you.
From there, I was dragged into the chambers where the magistrate was. She didn't see me in court. I was dragged into chambers.
Miss Robert, you have committed a serious crime.
And I was given a paper saying, you're being accused of an electricity bill which you haven't paid. You've broken some furniture in the nightclub and the landlady's got a complaint against you. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't know anything about this. This is rubbish. And anyway, I set up the electricity bill in my name. It's nothing to do with the landlady. It's between me and the electricity people. They said, no, the bill is this much and you have to pay money. I said, but I don't have any money. And the magistrate said, if you don't pay 300,000 shillings right now, which was about £3,000, you're going in. And by going in, that means going in prison. I said, where am I going to get that money from? She said, okay, that's me for the day. She can go in. She got up, picked up her bag, walked out the door. And that was it. There was nobody else to protest to because she was the only body who could undo the order. I was dragged from that office, crying, screaming. I saw Moffat down there, and I was screaming at him, help me, do something about it, quickly, do something. I don't want to go to prison.
She's coming outside, been pushed all over the place by the back of the gun. I'm trying to comfort her, telling her, be sure that I'm gonna come. I'm gonna be there for whatever it takes. I'll make sure I'll protect her.
Deep inside, I knew no matter what, for that night at least, I was going to prison. There was nothing they could do because the magistrate had gone home. I was thrown on the back of this truck with all of those women from the holding cells on this big open back truck where everybody could see you. So we drove off. We were bumped in this truck throughout the whole of Malindi. There were people watching from the side of the streets. Of course, they're going to stare at a white person in the back of a prison lorry. I was an oddity. I felt like that small. It was humiliating. It's almost like how the mighty have fallen, because one minute I'm like this nightclub owner and I've, living my dream, and all of a sudden I'm a bloomin' criminal. And that's how I felt. I felt shame as if I really was a criminal, even though I'd done nothing wrong. I was shoved into this small room with 2 prison officers and 2 prisoners, and I was told, strip naked. People were obviously staring at me. Being again a white person, I was an object of curiosity. I was extremely ashamed and embarrassed because I still had this big angry mess of a stomach, big red scar. Basically, I was told, bend over, we're gonna strip search you. And they did an internal search, and it was painful, and it was embarrassing, and I've never had anything like that done to me before. And I felt, I don't know, I felt like dirt.
This is a woman who's never seen this kind of treatment in her life. And she's not even healed up properly. And they're laughing, saying, oh, you think this is Europe where you come here, you're given your PlayStation in jail? This is not jail, this is remand. And you better get used to it, or else we're gonna make you black even if you're white.
I was put into a cell with, must be about 20 other women in there. I was basically told to sleep on the floor. So I sat in a corner and cried and wondered what I'd done that was so bad. The prison was steaming hot. There were mosquitoes everywhere. I'd already had malaria 5 times throughout my time of living in Kenya, and I could see it happening again very easily. Conditions in the prison were horrendous. They were unbelievable, really. People had TB. They had HIV. One of the worst things that happened has got to be when they make you kaba. Kaba means, in Swahili, it means you have to crouch down on your toes with your hands behind your head and balance there. This is normally when they do a head count. I didn't know the word cover, so when they said it the first time, I didn't crouch down. I didn't know what it meant. So I was beaten with a stick. When I got down, obviously in pain, I couldn't balance. I just kept tipping over and falling down. And every time I did that, I'd be hit with a stick.
When I heard that I wanted to climb that fence and eat somebody, I wanted to eat somebody, but there was nothing I could do. These guys, they have AKs. They were protected. They were the law.
Day after day went by and I had no idea if I was going to get out or how I was going to get out. I thought that was it.
What Nikki didn't realise was that the lawyer that Moffat had hired had already done everything he could to secure her release. And even though he'd paid the full bond, the magistrate had other ideas.
I found out afterwards that the magistrate refused to sign the release papers. Nobody knew why, but she just made sure I stayed in.
After 10 days in prison, the magistrate finally released Nikki.
Oh, you should have seen me. I was all over the place. I was over the moon because of the relief to just see her, just to know my daughter's gonna get her mother back.
Nikki left the prison confused as to why she'd been sent there in the first place. But she soon found out.
After I started to feel a bit better, I sort of inquired about the club. I found out that everything I'd left in the club had been taken out, the locks had been changed, and worst of all, I found out that the magistrate who'd put me in prison was now running the club. The landlady had got in a stupid white person who'd been naive, who'd spent her money there, who'd done the place up, got in really good business, made the place really pumping, and then decided to snatch it back.
Nikki Roberts had gone to Kenya in pursuit of her dream. That dream was now in tatters.
The thing with Kenya is the majority believe that if you're white, you must have gold in your pockets. It's just a misconception that if you're white, you must have money, and therefore they're poor. Why shouldn't they have some of your money?
In 2003, Nikki and Moffat got married in Kenya before deciding to return to the UK. Their marriage didn't last, and Moffat returned to Africa.
He couldn't handle the lifestyle, he couldn't handle the fast pace of life because UK doesn't have the same relaxed atmosphere as Kenya. People are a lot colder, they don't stop and greet you in the street, and he found that very soul-destroying. The only thing I can really say that's been positive as far as what's come out with me is my daughter. She's the best thing that came out of my relationship with Moffat, and she's, you know, a good memory of Kenya. So as far as that's concerned, I'm happy. I'm really happy.
The future is this: we will be together. We will still love each other till the day we die, because Nicola and Roberts is my best friend.
There's a possibility we might get back together if we can put the past behind us. You know, now I'm well again, I feel strong enough to be able to deal with that. So who knows what the future can bring.
For Phil and Lynn McLean, a new life in West Africa seemed like paradise. But when they fell victim to an elaborate con, their world fell apart. Phil was beaten, arrested, became a fugitive, then a prisoner.
I was one kick away from possibly being killed.
The man I love, I may never see again.
I've been fishing from the Port of Wayne for most of life, and I could see the industry collapsing, declining fast.
I never really liked Weymouth much because it was really very quiet.
I was having a bad time in my relationship, to the point where divorce was inevitable.
I'd had a bad marriage. It broke down. Then I met Phil. It was love at first sight, for me anyway.
To be honest with you, it didn't take too long to fall in love with her.
Phil wanted to make a change in direction as much as I did.
I was originally born in Rhodesia, spent the first part of my life there. I think it's fair to say that I had a yearning to go back.
I liked Africa. I was always interested in Africa when I was younger. Phil sold his house, and we sold the fishing vessel that we had in the Weymouth Harbour.
When we seen that go, we knew that was the beginning of a new start for us.
We were off. I was happy. Just to get away from everything.
And we decided the place we wanted to go to make the start was Africa.
"18 years ago, Phil and Lynn arrived in Gambia with their life savings, full of hope for the future.
When we first arrived in Gambia, we immediately felt at home and, fell in love with the place.
The people were so welcoming, kind, warm.
Popular with tourists and travelers, Gambia seemed the perfect place to pursue their dream of running a motel together.
One of our good friends in Gambia knew he was on the lookout for some sort of business and pointed out a motel which is going to be coming up for lease.
It was totally run down. The paint was falling off the walls. There wasn't a proper kitchen.
I think there was 4 tables, dust on the floor when the barman slumped over the bar asleep.
There were people sleeping outside in hammocks on the front, clothes on the floor. But I've got a good imagination. I could see it in about 2 minutes. That would be perfect. Although we knew there was a lot of money to be spent.
But I thought we could really make something of this. We were probably about to use the best part of our life savings. I think friends, family thought we were a tad crazy taking on this project, especially investing into a country we didn't know. But then I felt we wanted to be ourselves, do what we wanted to do. It did cost more than we thought. In the end, I think we close to £70,000 spent on the place.
As soon as we opened the doors, the customers just came from nowhere. They were coming from 20 kilometers away. They were coming from the city. It was swinging. It was a really happy evening.
We felt we'd become part of the community. We felt at home.
For the next few weeks, the motel flourished.
This guy walked into the bar, struggled, staggered into the bar. I could clearly see he wasn't well, and my immediate thoughts were to help him. He introduced himself as Nick. He seemed quite a nice chap. He said, "I'd like a cup of tea if you don't mind."
He'd explained that he lost his job. He'd been living on the streets for the last couple of 3 days. He wasn't well.
So I offered him a room, which we had, an empty room.
I think Lynn was Nick's saviour, basically doing a nursing job, really, and she looked after him well.
After a few days, he was better. He was up and about on his feet. He made himself very useful. He was helping around the place.
Nipping behind the bar and doing the job when the barman had gone elsewhere. He just fitted in.
Nick and Phil got on really well. I was quite happy for that because Phil hadn't actually met many people. And it was great, actually, to have Nick about.
We both agreed he was a good asset for the business.
Nick, I swear, was a magician.
He was very good at card tricks. Excellent.
But he always liked to do it for money. He'd always have a bet.
He could fool anybody, anytime. You could bet on it. You'd never win against Nick.
But the locals loved it.
He could keep customers amused all day long.
We had another guy come in the bar. His name was John.
When he first started drinking in the bar, you couldn't help noticing because we're in a predominantly Muslim country and he used to drink Guinness.
He was a quiet guy. He'd sit there on his own.
But he became a regular customer and blended in after a while, and he seemed a very nice chap.
John and Nick seemed to know each other. They'd go through to the back rooms, out of earshot, I always thought. Sometimes I picked up on a couple of sort of kind of strange conversations. Unusual things about money, and quite vast amounts of money. They would talk millions. When I would go in, they would stop talking. Something wasn't ringing right to me.
Lynn said, "You're spending too much time with this John." And it seemed a bit shady, she said. My answer to that was, perhaps you're being a little paranoid.
Just don't worry about it, he said. Nick's fine, don't worry about him.
Why should I be suspicious? They hadn't done anything wrong. But Lynn's intuition told her differently. Should have listened.
Lynn and Phil McLean's Gambian motel was flourishing. They were planning a trip back to the UK, and their friend Nick had a proposition.
Nick approached me and just asked me as simple as you might ask someone when they're going down a shop. "Do you mind me doing me a favour?" Nick was asking the favour on behalf of John. I said, "Well, what is it?" He said, "Well, if you're up in London, a couple of stones," he said, "worth, £200-300. You can drop it into a friend of mine there, a jeweller. If you bring the money back, he said, I can help repay you for all you've done." He described them, if I remember rightly, as a couple of mellers, which are very small diamonds. I said, "Oh," I said, "all right." I said, "Well, when we do go back, yeah, no problem."
Taking Nick's precious stones with them, Lynn and Phil set off back to Britain, thinking they were leaving the motel in safe hands. But when they got back, Nick's stones turned out to be not so precious after all.
Around about the second week I was up in London, I took him the address Nick had given, Spoke to the guy in there. He took one look at him and said, well, they're topaz. And he said, £50, he said, if you're lucky. I said, well, I told they're small diamonds. He said, no. He said, topaz. He said, no, I don't deal in topaz. He said, so I'm not going to buy them. And I thought nothing of it and walked out. Carried on what I was doing in London and went back to Weymouth.
We had a phone call from a friend which owned a nightclub just down the road from us in the Gambia.
She said, there's trouble at the motel. I think you need to make your way back and sort it out.
So we decided that Phil would go back a couple of days before me and that I would stay in the UK and finish off what business had to be finished.
I couldn't imagine what could have gone wrong. As I drew up against the motel, everything looked fairly normal. I could clearly see that the place had been ransacked, locks had been broken, doors had been broken open. I think practically everything had gone. The whole caboose. Even lampshades were missing. Furniture, curtains, tables, chairs, drinks, food. I went into our office. That was bare. I can remember my stomach churning over, just wondering the reason why. When I turned round and saw John approaching me, John was shouting, "Where's my diamonds? Where's my money? You stole my diamonds." I said, I haven't stolen your diamonds. I still have your diamonds. I said, they're not diamonds, they're topaz.
Those are not my diamonds. I want my diamonds.
And I threw a question. I said, you're not responsible for all these things missing, are you? He said, it's all mine. He said, until you pay me, he said, you don't get them back. I said, pay you what? He said, 4 million dalasses. That's £250,000. I thought the guy must be crazy. And then a couple of henchmen laid into me and beat me to the floor and kicked me. And kicked me hard, too.
Oh, I want my diamonds! Oh.
My first thoughts were to go to the local police station and try and get him arrested. And that's where I went. Very, very angry. I said, you know, we got the motel round the corner. I've been robbed, broken into, all the things are gone. I explained that it seemed that John was responsible for stealing all the things. And it was almost like a piece of magic that appeared from nowhere. John walked out of the room and he was laughing. And that put a shiver up my backbone.
That's him. That's the man.
And that's when I figured out, this has all been planned. I got pushed into the cell. The stench was terrible. There was one bucket between 8 people, which was overflowing. No seats, no benches. I remember thinking to myself, I've been stitched up. What do they want? Which was pretty apparent, of course. Money. It was a game they were going to be playing. And I was thinking to myself, I'd have to prepare myself for the morning. But the only thing is I didn't get any sleep. The cell was undone. And they said to me, we're taking you into the CID room. You will get your chance to explain there. I felt quite encouraged that anybody who's slightly level-headed, certainly in the CID department, would understand what's happened. So I had a little bit of encouragement.
Oh, Fee! Take a seat, my friend. Take a seat.
He had a smile. First thing he said, Mr. Phillip, he said, what are you doing here? Why have they brought you here? Why don't you tell me all about it? Made me feel quite good. And every time I said something, oh dear, he said, oh, really, you know? Oh, no, like, you know. And he had in his hand a piece of paper which he asked me to look at. And it was a written statement. He said, all I want you to do is read this. He said, and sign it. I read it, and to much of my amazement, it was a confession of a charge of stealing 2 diamonds. And I said, what the hell do you think you're doing? I tore it up in front of him. He just slammed in like a bird on his prey.
You will sign it! You will sign this paper!
So he turned from Mr. Nice Guy straight away to Mr. Nasty. And I can't explain how nasty he was with it. He said, this is a serious charge. He said, we're talking 4 million Delasses. He said, it's my job to get the truth out of you. So I'm going to keep you in the station till I get the truth.
Phil hadn't phoned me that day to tell me that he had arrived safely. I was beginning to get worried. Then another day went by, and I was getting pretty concerned now.
I managed to sleep just maybe the odd 10 minutes, 15 minutes max, whilst the officers were out of the room. But 10 minutes later, time for questioning again. Various ways they woke me. Usually a hard slam with a foot on the chair. Sometimes they're pushing my head up, slap on the back. Mr. Phillip, wake up. Time for questioning. During that period, I must have been questioned 50, 60 times. Over the period of 6 days, same routine. Asked me to make a statement, refused to make a statement.
I understand the time, but you have to sign here.
I never thought once of signing. Not at all. There's a lot of people which would have signed anything just to get out of there.
Okay, we'll be back.
I knew if I did that, there's worse to come, not better.
The phone rang, I answered it, and there was a strange voice on the end. Said that Phil was locked up in the police station and I wasn't to travel to the Gambia because it was too dangerous. I ran to the bathroom and I was absolutely violently sick. And being on my own was really difficult as well. I felt quite helpless.
Unfortunately, knew I could be dead.
Wake Mr. Phillip. Wake up, wake up. Wake Mr. Phillip. Wake up. Time to wake up. Wake up. Wake up, Phillip. Phillip, it's me. It's me, your lawyer.
Lynn, I think, made other contacts and phoned our lawyer. He said, you know what serious trouble you're in, don't you? You could get 10 years in prison for this. Maybe I'm the only person which can help you. But like all things, you have to pay. And of course I was carrying cash, and the police hadn't taken anything from me. And I made a payment to him of 7,500 Delasses in order to seek for my release or bail. He said, don't worry, he said, this time tomorrow, he said, you'll be free. And he disappeared.
Wake up! Wake up, Phillip! Wake up!
I think it was on the 4th or 5th day, I was taken outside onto the steps at the police station to be able to talk to my lawyer. And the lawyer said, Mr. Phillip, I've got bad news for you. He said, well, the truth is, I'm not acting on behalf of John now. He's paid me to act against you. I was speechless. Then I said to him, "Can I have my money back, please?" The answer is no. Not only did he double-cross me, he stole the money. And that was our lawyer.
After 6 days in police custody and exhausted after very little sleep, Phil was bundled off to court.
At the magistrates' court, there was a variety of witnesses which appeared. There was John, of course, which is a complainant, and one of the main witnesses was Nick. I was officially being charged in court with the theft of 2 diamonds to the value of 4 million dollars, £250,000. The magistrate asked John to describe these diamonds, and his description of the diamonds was, they're as big as an egg. They were saying that I personally tested these diamonds and agreed with them they were worth $4 million. If I didn't bring him the $4 million, I would let him cut my throat. It seemed that the magistrate appeared to believe him. When Nick came to court, I didn't know what to expect. This was the man which Lynn and I had rescued, even saved his life. He's the man which was our best friend. He's the man we trusted. He told a pack of lies, a complete pack of lies. Nick said that I'd switched the diamonds and replaced them with something completely different. I just knew there and then that he was part of the conspiracy. I felt about Nick a total betrayal of what I classified only months earlier as being one of our best friends.
Phil's case was adjourned. The court took his passport and he was released on bail. For the first time in 6 days, he was able to speak to Lynn.
Phil had a lump in his throat, I could hear that. I was crying as well. And all I wanted to do was, get back to the Gambia and see Phil. I was missing him so much. But Phil continued to tell me that he didn't want me to come to the Gambia. He was told they would kill me.
I explained to Lynn very clearly the threats from John and his cronies. If your wife comes here, I'll kill her. She's dead if she comes in this country.
He spoke a few more words and the I loved yous. Then he said he had to go. And with that, we said goodbye. But I wasn't sure whether I'd ever really speak to him again.
Freed on bail by a Gambian court, Phil McLean would soon face final judgment.
I felt determined to go back to the motel. It's our motel, paid for, and I saw no reason why I shouldn't carry on running it. Regardless of the situation, don't run away. I turned round and out of the blue, John stood there, no clothes, all apart from a thong, and he said, "I've come to kill you." He was chanting, spitting here and there and everywhere. I thought, this guy's nuts, but he was being very, very serious. This guy was a witch doctor. This probably explained why he seemed to have such power over people. But then out of the blue, his henchman lunged at me and just beat the crap out of me. It took 3 of them to do it. This time I fought back. I got a couple of blows in, but 3 against 1 is not. No. And they kicked me to the ground, and they kicked hard. I lost both of my dog teeth. I was bruised all around the rib cage. I was cut on the face, cut on the arms. I had boot burns on my chest. I was one kick away from possibly being killed.
In fear of his life, Phil abandoned the motel. He took refuge in a friend's secure compound, well out of town. After 3 months apart, it finally seemed safe for Lynn to join him.
It was like we'd been apart for a long time, and we was just so pleased to be together again.
But the sense of safety lasted only a few days.
He'd obviously found out where I moved to, and it started off with sticks being banged on the wall on the outside the compound, and tins and drums being beaten and whistles being blown.
We could hear our names being called, for sure. We knew it was directed at us.
Phil!
They actually got over the wall into the compound itself, and they started dancing and chanting.
It was terrifying. They were working up to a frenzy.
We could see them going round, 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 round.
The next thing we knew, there was a rustle on the roof.
And they were working their way through the grass roof, and then a pair of hands and arms appeared through the roof.
Immediately, I just picked up the first thing, which happened to be a broom handle, and started hitting these hams. If we hadn't have fended them off, I think they probably would have entered the room. But it was pretty scary, you know.
They all disappeared back over the wall, and that episode was over. But now we started not to feel safe there.
Phil!
Now that John had discovered their hideaway, they were both at risk, and Phil persuaded Lynn to fly home.
The leaving is the hardest part. The departure. You know, I can't describe the hollowness which is left there.
Phil couldn't leave Gambia. The authorities still held his passport, and in just 5 days' time, he was due in court to face the verdict.
I saw that the odds were well stacked against me. I could see nothing but bad coming out of this. I stood to go to prison for 10 years, and I didn't like that idea.
Faced with the prospect of prison, Phil came to a decision. He would go on the run, using illegal people smugglers to get him out of the country.
You pay the right people, you take the route. Could be caught. For me, that would have been very bad news. Put in the hands of the Gambian government trying to escape. I'd lose my bail and end up in the prison.
His plan was to cross the border into Senegal, make his way to the coast, and charter a boat to Sierra Leone, where he had contacts who could get him back to England. But with his trial date looming, he had just 5 days to do it.
You'd hit one tree on one side, and the vehicle would lurch the other side, and then you hit another tree, and it banks it back into the track. And this is 5 hours like this.
At the end of day 1, Phil was over the border. But now he was entering war-torn Senegal.
So the journey was going really quite well. But the vehicle started to slow down. And you could clearly hear the anxiety amongst the people I was traveling with. Person who said his passports, which is the one thing which I was dreading, because if I was caught, basically I'd be returned back to the Gambia. And at that point I thought, plan B, quick. If it works elsewhere, why not bribe them? It's the only thing which is going to work for me. And I thought, so well, they could go either way. They could either say, no, what are you doing here? Or they could take the money. I'm sure he could see I was shaking. It was my lucky day. They took the money. I thought, I've escaped one. How many more stops might there be?
Phil reached the coast. Now he needed a boat to smuggle him to Sierra Leone. But the locals were nervous.
I spent hours and hours haggling with the fishermen there. They were running a very high risk. They didn't know who I was, what I'd done, what I was escaping from. They seemed to think the money didn't outweigh the risk, and they didn't really want to take me.
It was a severe blow. But Phil resolved to continue the escape on foot. Between him and Sierra Leone lay 300 miles of jungle, swamp, and rebel territory.
That entailed taking a bush trek through swamp area, and they're crocodile infested. I first met with mangroves, which took me hours to cross. And by then, I'd actually crossed what I guess was the borderline into Guinea-Bissau. And then I met with the other side of the river, with the other mangroves. And at that stage, I thought, there's no way I'm going to get through this. I felt beaten, really.
With just 2 days left before his trial, Phil had to face the inevitable. The escape had failed. He had no alternative but to turn back and face the court.
I took what I think was the sensible decision to turn around and go back. But the other thing which led me to that decision is I had a feeling inside me that I should go back, if only just to clear my name.
Phil was smuggled back into Gambia, just in time for Judgment Day.
I can remember leaving about 7 in the morning, and I thought I'd walk to the court. And I remember watching the birds as I walked past, the trees, and looking at life and nature, and thinking, well, perhaps I might miss this. On the other hand, in 2 hours' time, I might be walking back up through this road. So I was walking into the unknown.
The hearing was brief. Phil was found guilty and sentenced to 6 years in prison with hard labor.
When he said those words, guilty, couldn't believe it. Shock and horror. You know, that they could actually even think of convict anybody on this evidence. My first thoughts were for Lynn, that she was going to be perhaps on her own for up to 6 years.
It was like a nightmare. It was like my life had finished. And I was feeling it ever so deeply sorry for Phil.
Phil's destination was Gambia's notorious state prison, Mile 2.
The brutality immediately when I got in there, I was beating the cell with a truncheon. A drastic place inside. And the death rate is very high, just on malaria alone. I hear stories that I was the first white man to be in that prison in the last 2 years. The last white man was carried out in a box. Logic simply told me, I don't think I'm going to last the first month. Food was a bit scarce, I think, fed once a day. It usually consisted of a small bowl of rice and just a fish head. The hard labor which I'd been sentenced to soon became clear on my day one. It involved pounding rice into a kuss. The stick probably weighed maybe 40, 50 pounds. I was pounding the food for the day for the prisoners within, and as you pounded the rice, so the flies pitched. And every time you come down with a piece of wood, which is like a hammer, you just squash the flies straight into the rice. And that somewhat put me off of my diet of rice and fish, because I just knew what I was eating was rice, flies and fish. I'm not a big chap, and I've certainly lost a lot of weight and a lot of strength already. I could so easily have fallen very, very ill with exhaustion, dehydration and malnutrition. So when the guards weren't looking, the inmates were good enough to take over for me and pound for me and sit me down out of the sun, because one of the problems is it was done in the midday sun and it was maybe 40 degrees C. This strapping big chap, which was in the same cell as me, he said, if I whistle, he said, you get back up here now and carry on. I would have been in a really, really bad way without them.
With the inmates' help, Phil had survived his first days in captivity, but he still had another 6 years to go. At Gambia's Mile 2 prison, Phil McLean had served 2 weeks of his 6-year sentence.
One of the guards came to the cell and shouted my name and said, "Visitor!" And everybody clapped their hands inside the cell and they said, "You're very lucky. Nobody gets visitors here." To my surprise, I could see Mr. Norman Manison.
He was a British businessman who'd set up a company in the Gambia. We'd only just met him briefly, but he did say, anytime you ever need anything, just to call, and which I did. I called Norman.
He was in a terrible, shocking state. They give him 6 years. I didn't think he would last 6 months. He convinced me of his honesty, and it was quite obvious to me that he had been set up and conned.
What clinched it for Norman was the name of the man at the heart of the scam, a man he'd employed in Gambia, Nick.
Nick was acting as our agent in Gambia, but it became apparent the man was an out-and-out con. I myself had been robbed for some £35,000. Nick's environment was very much with the mafias out there.
He said, and I'm going to organise and try and get you some bail on appeal. And if we can get bail for you, he said, we can get you 8. But I cannot promise anything whatsoever. He said, but I can do my best.
Norman's lawyer took on the case and lodged an appeal. A week later, Phil was released on bail.
I was getting a round of applause from hundreds of inmates, so that made me feel good. I looked into the driver's mirror and I could see myself looking like somebody had been abandoned on a desert island for 2 years and could have easily dived into a bin for food. That's what I looked like and felt like.
Five months later, after a short hearing at Gambia's Supreme Court, the charges were thrown out and Phil was acquitted.
He was free. Free. I looked at Phil and Phil looked at me and it was, his face changed. I could see he was happy. It made me happy. And it was almost like a new life starting again.
We were ecstatic about it, of course we were. Finally, justice had been done.
The most emotional thing was when leaving the Gambia was passing the motel. I could hardly look at it, actually. I was happy to leave it behind me, but also upset at the same time.
We'd lost our dream. We'd lost all hope. We'd lost everything.
Even though we only had £10 in our pocket, we were together again, and that's all mattered.
The dream of Gambia is long gone. But in Spain, Phil and Lynn have found a smaller, safer version of paradise.
I mean, the most important thing is Lynn and I have got each other. And second to that is I'm still alive. And I value life probably better these days than I ever did before.
We've got a perfect relationship. We're perfect friends. We're together today, and it's just great.
Really, I'm quite content. But it's always in the back of the mind that, you know, we'll never get back what we had before. But it's only money. After all, it's only money.
For New Yorker Mark Seidenfeld, it was the chance of a lifetime to run one of Kazakhstan's growing telephone companies.
This was really a great opportunity, sort of an adventure, if you will.
I'll kill you! I'll kill everybody who loves you!
But the dream job turned to a nightmare when Mark fell on the wrong side of a local power broker.
Of course, this is quite a dangerous thing to do in an environment like Kazakhstan.
it would see Mark flung into a bleak Siberian jail, dragged thousands of miles in a prison train full of violent criminals, before facing trial on trumped-up charges.
I suddenly get this sinking feeling that things are not going as planned. I was living in New York City. Last job had finished and was looking around for a new opportunity. I had looked around in the US, and 9/11 had sort of canceled out a lot of opportunities that I had been looking at over there. One day I'm just reading the newspaper, and in the employment section, there's this big block letter ad saying, opportunity for COO of telephone company in Kazakhstan. And I'm thinking, this is cool. What I did was just, took my resume and faxed it to the number listed in the advertisement and promptly forgot about it. Next morning, I get a phone call. How soon can we meet? And I'm sitting there, looking at the phone, trying to figure out, is this real? What did I get myself into? And, should I actually go to the interview or not?
But, unemployed and with his marriage over, Mark did go to the interview. A month later, he arrived in Almaty to become the chief executive of one of Kazakhstan's new telecoms companies,
I knew very little about Kazakhstan. As the airplane lands, you get a view of this amazing mountain range, which, stretches basically as far as the eye can see. First thing that hits you when you're leaving the airport and driving into town, on the outskirts, you're still looking at the drab Soviet era, gray, huge apartment blocks. And then as you go in, you start seeing these very attention-grabbing buildings.
A crossroads between Asia and Europe, Almaty had once been a stopping point on the Silk Road to China. Now, with the fall of communism and independence from Russia, thanks to its vast oil reserves, Kazakhstan was booming.
Almaty was an extremely, and still is, an extremely dynamic city. Make no mistake, this is no Borat. This is a place that has its high-rises, its investment bankers, the oil companies, the five-star hotels. If someone at that point in time was looking for an unparalleled opportunity for business, adventure, it would be hard to beat what Kazakhstan offered at the time.
For Mark, who was just 34, it was a huge break. Although he'd worked in telecoms before, he'd never run a company.
There's a certain amount of apprehension. You're in a new country. It's a new set of responsibilities. As confident that you may be in your abilities, there's still that much that's a challenge to yourself that you're going to have to get through.
It was early 2002 when Mark began work as chief executive of ANA.
It was really weird because you walk in and all the people are looking at you with a mixture of, say, apprehension or not really knowing, and all these thoughts are going through my head of, yes, I can do it, but then there's that little voice in back saying, well, better make sure you can.
ANA's chairman was British banker John Ward, someone with considerable experience of working in the new markets of the former Soviet Union.
My impressions when I first met him was perhaps, a brash young man in a hurry to get to wherever he wants to be. He clearly has an ability to translate that energy into action, which is the attribute I came to admire most.
Mark's brief was simple. Grow the company into a lucrative business, which could then be sold on for a tidy profit.
The higher value the company had upon exit, the larger bonus that a significant amount of the management team would get, myself included. I was well aware of the way that business is conducted and the risks and opportunities that that involved. So when I started work in Kazakhstan, I was pretty convinced that I was well prepared for anything that might happen.
After several months at the helm of telecoms company Arna, Mark Seidenfeld thought he was getting the hang of doing business Kazakh style.
Having good connections and networking, especially in these parts of the world, are very important to getting your business done. Once a month, there would be a get-together primarily of expats, the business community, and they called it the kindred spirits.
So this was a group of people, a society, that donated bottles for a very pleasant evening, which involved drinking as much malt whiskey as you could possibly tolerate, and included in that would be some rather nice cigars. Mark saw this as a way of promoting his business and himself as part of the process of getting to know people.
This just allowed us to go directly to the top. If you figure on the total amount spent on these bottles of whiskey and cigars and the amount of contracts that we got out of it, it was probably the most cost-effective marketing that in the history of business.
Of course, any business that's operating in these emerging markets, it's always useful to have someone who knows how the system works.
For Mark Seidenfeld, that man was Murat Zunusov, Arna shareholder, local Mr. Fix-It, and power broker.
Murat makes a tremendous first impression. He's an extremely physically fit individual. He has a black belt in Aikido. He dresses in the finest and latest Italian fashions, which, if I remember correctly, he makes a biannual trip to Milan to stock up. His English is very, very good, and in general gave a very, very good impression of someone that I'd be able to work with. When they hired me, I was told that I have this tremendously easy job because all of these issues that had to deal with politics, government, licensing, all of this would be taken off my shoulders, and Murat, this would be his full-time job dealing with these issues.
Murat Zunusov is an interesting character. When you meet him, you meet a very urbane, very well-educated, very pleasant, very personable individual. It's only when one gets to know him a little better that perhaps the things that he says are not the things that he's going to do. And perhaps the methods that he uses to achieve whatever ends he's seeking are less than fair and less than above board.
Thanks to Mark, 6 months after joining Arna, the phone company was booming.
Hey. When I got to Arna, we were dealing in voice only and in one city. On a month-to-month basis, we had already doubled revenues. We were in 5 cities. We were doing data, internet, satellite, you name it. And it was a company that everyone knew and had a reputation for being dynamic, ahead of the curve, on top of technology. Life in general was, about as good as it gets.
To get there, Mark had to make some tough decisions.
The company had more employees than it needed to get the job done. A lot of those were people that had been hired because they were friends of or relatives of either current or past shareholders or high-level employees.
We're gonna have to let you go.
There were a number of positions which were filled by people who technically weren't really up to the job or had no technical knowledge whatsoever.
Many of those people owed their jobs to influential Arna shareholder and fixer, Murat Zunusov.
Usually I would have a talk with them explaining that you actually have to earn your salary, which for some people was a very radical concept.
What I need you to do is...
So there were some difficult decisions that Mark had to make.
Most of these people, because of their friendship to Murat, they felt that they were untouchable. And at first they would say, well, do you know who I am, or that Murat hired me? And I would say, that's really wonderful. I understand that Murat is involved in a variety of different businesses, and I think you can ask him for a job in one of them. But here at Arna, this is, you got to earn your keep.
Okay, this is your severance package. I'm sure you...
And of course, this is quite a dangerous thing to do in an environment like Kazakhstan, because this would be seen as a rejection not of the individual, but of the person who was promoting him.
Who do you think you're talking to, huh? I am Murat. Murat. You remember Murat, me, huh?
When Murat heard that his cronies had been fired, he began threatening his chief executive, Mark Seidenfeld.
I came to the realization that, Murat has sort of two sides to him. One is the rational business side. He then becomes this, emotional, uncontrollable Mr. Hyde. And, that definitely created a certain amount of fear.
This hurts you.
No one really expected, myself included, for any of those threats to transpire into anything tangible.
He did not attend another board meeting after that. One can only suppose that he was not a happy man.
But his anger didn't stop Mark. Now Arna's CEO turned his sights on Murat himself.
He had a fixed salary, but in addition to that fixed salary, he had basically unlimited expenses. We paid rent on a fairly nice house, full-time security guards, both for the house and for him personally, car driver. And all of this amount, generally came out to between $100,000 and $200,000 a year. Murat would hand in, let's say, in a month, $1,000 worth of restaurant bills. I'd say, Murat, what's that for? And he would say, oh, it was for taking various people out to dinner or to discuss various strategy or a new contract. But as time went on, and we're not getting the contracts and we're not getting our issues taken care of, then it calls into question as to why are we spending this money? He was costing us this significant amount of money, yet virtually none of the tasks that he had been assigned, none of them were being accomplished.
It was agreed that this contract should be terminated. But unfortunately, it was Mark who had to actually sit down with him and say, the contract is now at an end.
What has to be done has to be done. So I can't say that there was a fear of giving him the news, although by this time we knew him well enough to expect that he would attempt some type of revenge.
Sure this is what you want? Well, I think you just made a very, very bad decision.
He lost his contract, and at that time, I guess it was probably one or his only source of livelihood. And he saw Mark as the instrument by which these actions were executed. But I don't think any of us thought that he would take the actions that he did.
As you can see, over the last 4 years...
With Murat out of the way, Mark was able to get back to the business of growing Arna. By 2004, after 2 years running the company, its profits had tripled. It was time to put Arna on the market, and for Mark and his European investors to cash in.
Selling the company or finding buyers for the company was about as easy as you could imagine.
10 different buyers came forward to express interest. One of them was shareholder Murat Zanusov himself.
I was at a telecom show in Europe at the time and received a hysterical phone call from Murat.
No, this is not a problem, this is your problem.
Threatening, yelling, it was really difficult to make sense of what he was saying.
Do not interrupt me, understand me?
he was absolutely livid that we would have the audacity to go in there and offer a competing bid, which was actually better for the shareholders.
I'll kill you! I'll kill everybody who loves you! You understand?
Murad finally succeeded in buying Anna. But it was only through bidding $5 million more than he'd originally bargained for. $5 million that would come back to haunt Mark Seidenfeld.
Murad has said quite openly that Mark was responsible for him paying, I think, $5 million too much for the business.
Within just a couple of hours of Murad taking control of Anna, Mark and his senior management team were fired. Mark himself was accused of embezzling $40,000 of Anna's money.
The wording that they used was that we were temporarily being dismissed pending an investigation into the finances of the company. We did register with the U.S. Embassy, and the U.S. Embassy, for whatever reason, said, look, this is, you're not in Kansas anymore, so to speak, and gave us their 24-hour hotline and said, we're not expecting anything to happen, but if anything does, or if you feel in any type of danger, why don't you give us a call?
Although an independent investigation quickly cleared his name, Mark decided to leave Kazakhstan, thinking that would be the last he would ever hear of Murad Salusov. He moved to Moscow and soon found a new job with a large Russian mobile phone company.
I was able to land a good position with the top telecoms company in Russia, with a very bright career path in front of me.
Now fluent in Russian, Mark quickly settled into life in the capital. With him was his new Russian girlfriend, Natia.
We met for the first time when he asked me to lunch. We worked in the same office. When I saw him, he was handsome and well-dressed, like a James Bond character. We had a good conversation, which led to a relationship.
Mark's new role involved traveling all over Russia drumming up business. One such trip in late 2005 took him to the remote Siberian town of Blagoveshchensk, close to the border with China.
This was the last business trip that I was going to be making during that calendar year, and Natia and I were scheduled to go to Morocco on vacation with some friends of ours.
He was at the airport about to board a plane home when he was called aside.
The ticket agent turns to a policeman that was standing nearby, and based on what usually happens, I just thought that this guy's going to check my papers and my registration, which is something normally done to foreigners. He starts opening and looking and checking my passport against this paper.
What's the problem?
And I see the words on this paper, Kazakhstan and Arna. I suddenly get this sinking feeling that things are not going as planned.
What's going on? Show me.
When I get to the police station, that's when they start telling me that, oh, there's a warrant out from Kazakhstan, we're going to extradite you and you're going to be placed in prison. Probably by that time, I've crossed the border and or gone through airports on maybe 30, 40 occasions since leaving Kazakhstan. It just didn't compute. Emotionally, it is very insane and shocking to have this happen, but the emotions didn't kick in first.
Mark was thrown into a police cell with other local criminals. but he was allowed one phone call to his girlfriend, Natia.
Hi, Natia. Remember the threats that Murat made in Kazakhstan? It seems that they've come true. I've been arrested. I hope this works out as soon as possible. Whatever happens, I want you to know that I love you, and that was the end of the phone call.
It was early in the morning, around 5 o'clock. The phone rang and it was kind of unexpected. I was shocked, and I expected it to be a wrong number.
It turned out that Mark was wanted in Kazakhstan on the same old trumped-up charges of embezzling Anna's funds.
The accusations had been spelled out previously in great detail. They had been proven false. The charges that Kazakhstan was seeking my extradition for were those exact same charges with the exact same, so to speak, proofs.
American telecoms executive Mark Seidenfeld had been arrested on the way home to Moscow from a business trip to Siberia. It looked as if his old adversary, Murat Zanusov, was behind it.
The reason for arresting me there is very simple. If I would be in Moscow, all my friends, Natia, people from work, would be able to come and give me moral support. By having me arrested in Blagoveshchensk, that's even more disorienting. This is not a hop, skip, and a jump. The flights aren't even, daily or anything like that. It put that much more pressure on me, and it was that much more of a revenge.
If found guilty by a Kazakh court, Mark faced up to 10 years in prison.
The second or third day is probably when I started the probably the most difficult period in my life ever, because that's when it's hit home that I am now behind a lock and key in a prison, and all that starts to really, really get to you. Blagoveshchensk is an extremely cold place, and it can get down to -40, -50 Celsius. And just to be able to sleep, we would take plastic soda bottles and warm up water. This hot water bottle would give you enough warmth to allow you to go to sleep. After a couple hours, I would be waking up from the cold and then have to go through the whole process again of getting more hot water to put into these bottles. So to get 6 hours of sleep, there were at least, 3 changes of water. You are in your cell for 23 hours a day. There's 1 hour of exercise, and you get taken out to this, it's not even a yard, it's basically a concrete patio, if you will. And to keep my health, I would just circle around the perimeter. First couple of months I did this, I did it running, but when you're running in such a small perimeter, you have to constantly lean, and that eventually caused some major pain in my knee, and I had to stop that, so I changed over to just fast walking. By my measurements, I was able to do between 3 and 4 kilometers a day of walking. The question comes up of, did you ever think of escaping? For one thing is, how? There are armed guards, high walls, barbed wire. And number two, from a practical sense, okay, let's say you've made it out of the prison walls. I'm an American, I'm in Siberia, where am I gonna go?
After 23 days behind bars, Mark's lawyer finally arrived with an extraordinary offer from Murat himself.
Murat will make sure that I am kept in prison unless ransom is paid to him in the amount of $5 million. $5
million. The exact same amount that Murat thought he'd overpaid when he bought Anna.
I have no idea where Murat could conceive that I would come up with anywhere near that amount of cash. It was quite obvious that Murat had used either money, influence, or both to have the police pursue this and issue an extradition warrant. My thoughts about Murat at that time was that I think this gentleman needs psychological care because he can't let go of something that was fought out, if you will, honest and fair. I did my job. I'm proud that I did it, and I wouldn't have done it any other way. Prison's not a nice place. There's no customer service hotline if you're not happy with the conditions. Now, there are definitely sadistic guards around in the prison systems that, that beat, that break ribs, that break arms. The less friendly guards obviously sort of took, I guess, pleasure in the fact that they see you suffering. At one point, this gorilla basically slams me against the wall.
Because he's a foreigner, Mark was moved into a cell alone while his lawyers tried to secure his release.
Maybe the first while that I was in solitary, there was a perception of this might be good. But then the tricks that your mind starts playing and the tremendous psychological pressure. Your mind is used to actually working, doing something, thinking of things. You're used to solving problems. All of this is gone. You're basically an animal in a cage. You don't have any freedom. You don't have any control over anything. You're isolated. And boredom is torture. Not only was there the shock of being arrested and now having my freedom taken away from me, but I have no one to talk to, I have no one to commiserate with, and I'm bored as hell with nothing to do but to think about the process, which is a vicious cycle. Because the more you think about it, the worse it gets. All three meals were sort of mystery goulash type of stuff. This is the food that's served. It's 3 times a day, 7 days a week, 365 a year.
Occasionally, Mark would get an old newspaper or magazine.
When I got this reading material, what I would force myself to do is read up to a certain amount and then try to space out, try to daydream, try to sleep, or do something so that, the magazine or the book at that time was by far my most treasured possession. By the time I had been under arrest for about 5 weeks, I get called out, and I think I'm just going to someone in the administration or maybe another medical check, and I get taken to the visitation room, and Natya is sitting over there.
Of course, I was very nervous, and I didn't want to let him know I was.
I was just overcome with so many emotions at once because on one hand, I'm feeling so guilty for putting her through all this. Yet at the same time, I'm overjoyed that she is supporting me and that she has come out here.
For a long time, he hadn't seen anyone. There was no support or even a lawyer. So naturally, there was a whole confusion of emotions. Fear, love, everything.
Natia decided to stay in Siberia to support Mark.
I couldn't afford to abandon him or give him an excuse to break down.
After 4 weeks of solitary confinement, Mark's legal team was no nearer to securing his release. Firing his lawyers, he finally decided that he had no alternative but to return to Kazakhstan to face trial. But there was a very real risk. The judge could be in the pay of Murat Zanusov.
I was not certain at all that there would be a fair trial. You know, you're dealing with what essentially is a third world country that does not have a judicial tradition. I had absolutely no expectations. Russia has a system for transporting prisoners over their vast territory, and they transport prisoners by train.
The 2,500-mile train journey from Blagoveshchensk to Almaty would take over a month, stopping along the way to pick up and drop off prisoners at some of Russia's most notorious jails.
In my case, it was 7 stops between Blagoveshchensk and Almaty prison, and basically get on a train, spend anywhere between 4 and 72 hours on that train, and then be let off at the local prison where the prison truck would transport you, and then you go through all the procedures of being booked in and registered and staying in that local prison anywhere from 48 hours up to 8 days. I haven't been able to sleep. With each kilometer passed, I felt I'm getting closer to some type of resolution. The demeanor of the guards would range for the whole spectrum of human personalities. And you'd have some guys who would actually interact with you as with another human being, all the way to the other end of some really sadistic guys who would treat you like you're just a piece of garbage. The worst thing about the prison train has to be the bathrooms. In each car, there can be 50, 60 prisoners. There's one bathroom. By the time you're a couple hours into the trip, by the time the first time they've made the runs and let everyone go to the bathroom, this is not someplace you want to visit.
There was one thing that kept Mark going. Natia, who followed the train as it rumbled across the Siberian landscape.
Natia managed to come to every city that I was during my train trip.
At every stop, at every station, I tried to catch a glimpse of him and to make sure that he saw me, so that we could support each other with a glance. I would instruct a lawyer to see him every day, pass food to him, so that he wouldn't be alone.
If Natia hadn't been involved the whole way through, I would be, one of two things. I'd either be dead or I'd be on a funny farm.
After 32 days on the prison train, Mark finally arrived in Almaty for his day in court. Accused of embezzling $40,000 from his old company Anna, he was facing a trial that could see him imprisoned for a decade.
I always knew that I was innocent, and I always knew that the facts and the documentation proved that. It had been very obvious that the only way they even got the case started was through corruption. As far as I understand, in most of the former Soviet Union, if you have been accused of a crime, have spent any time behind bars, even if it's something that you have obviously not committed, the 99% chance is that you will be convicted.
The allegations against Mark had already been investigated by independent auditors and dismissed. There was only one reason they'd been dragged up again: Murat Zanusov and his vendetta against Mark.
I was enormously frightened and apprehensive because to sustain the charges, clearly the system was not being allowed to operate in the normal way. The charges had no substance. But of course, Mark being in prison in the first place meant that the system had been interfered with.
Extradited from Russia, American executive Mark Seidenfeld was back in the Kazakh capital of Almaty on trial for fraud.
We're getting conflicting reports to the very end as to this is going to be a fair trial, this is not going to be a fair trial. I'm nervous, my lawyer's nervous, Natia's nervous.
A succession of prosecution witnesses were called to testify against Mark. All of them protégés of Anna's new owner, Murat Zanusov. At the heart of the case was the evidence of Anna's former cashier.
I think one moment during the trial really stands out in my mind, which was when the cashier herself was forced to admit under the cross-examination of the judge that she had not written the complaint or the accusation on her own, but that she had been put up to it and had not even written it, had basically signed her name at the bottom of a paper that Murat's lawyers had prepared for her.
The evidence that this cashier had presented was complete rubbish, manipulated, partial information, which no accountant was going to place any value on.
Использовал деньги компании для извлечения прибыли в собственных интересах. Спасибо, Ваша честь.
Despite the fact that every single witness for the prosecution had been totally discredited, totally ripped to shreds, there was still no way to know where the trial would go, because by declaring me innocent, the judge was basically declaring the law enforcement agencies as incompetent and, in the worst case, corrupt. And that is not usually done in the former Soviet Union.
The trial was becoming a battle between Mark's word and that of the man pulling the strings behind the scenes, Murat.
We made a motion to the court that Murat must be called as a witness.
Murat Zanusov.
And the judge asked, well, where is Murat? And they said, oh, it turns out that he is running a marathon in China. The judge herself actually laughed a little bit and said, oh, sure, and nobody knew about this on Friday. Well, I guess he's just, not a man enough to come here and actually see this through.
At the end of a long week of testimony, a tangled web of false accusations and forged documentation had clouded the truth. Mark's freedom now depended on whether the judge would take an honest view of the evidence before her.
Nervous as hell. The judge starts reading, and I'm just hearing the judge recount word for word the accusation, and I'm thinking, this is not good. Oh my God, I'm going to be convicted. Natia's listening. I'm looking at her and I'm seeing that she's starting to cry.
We well knew what kind of country this was and what could be in store for us, so I couldn't be 100% sure whether he would get off or be sentenced.
worst comes to worst, they'll send me to a penal colony. When we heard those magic words, оправдан, which is acquitted, the courtroom literally started cheering and clapping. And Mark is entitled to full compensation for moral and actual damages, which is a verdict that happens maybe 1 in 500 in the former Soviet Union.
In a legal system notorious for its corruption, Mark had been saved by an honest judge.
When the judge read the verdict of not guilty, of course I was very happy to hear it, because that is what we had all hoped for such a very long time.
As a free person, to finally be able to give her a tremendous hug. It's the hug that finally has the promise of future and freedom. The court martial, just according to protocol, is supposed to take me back down to the holding cell until my papers are signed and sealed so they can release me. And as he started to do that, the judge sees this from across the room, calls out saying, "Do not take him back down to the holding cell, take him straight to my chambers. I will sign the papers immediately. This guy's sat long enough, he's not going to sit a minute more."
Relieved is an understatement, right? He was pleased that he could actually walk in the open street again, that he could go and buy a pizza, he could just spend time with Natia.
If it hadn't been for Natia's devotion and love, I wouldn't be here today. I would either not be among the living, or I'd probably be in a padded cell somewhere, laughing and screaming.
But though the trial was over, the threat from Murat had not gone away.
We were, of course, worried that, having not been able to punish me in the way that he wanted to, using or bending the legal system, that there is a possibility, of course, that he could resort to something more primitive and crude. Wasted no time. I immediately traveled across the border to Kyrgyzstan.
Today, Mark is back in Moscow, still working in the telecoms business. He and Natia are still together and engaged to be married. Mark Seidenfeld has no plans to return to Kazakhstan.
This whole experience has definitely made me a bit more careful. I think that any expat who goes out to these places should be well aware that the danger exists, take the proper precautions as much as you can, and then cross your fingers and pray, because all of those precautions may not help you.